Hi everyone, and welcome back to AGS Stories, where we dive into the most dramatic, thought-provoking tales from Reddit. Today, we're exploring a story from the subreddit Am I the A-Hole? It's about a woman named Sara, 27, who finds herself stuck in a web of toxic relationships with her fiancé, Ethan, 33, and his entitled family. Sara's journey of self-discovery, resilience, and a plan to escape a suffocating life will leave you on the edge of your seat. Sara met Ethan 4 years ago when she was finishing her degree in graphic design. He seemed charming, funny, and easygoing, everything she thought she wanted in a partner. At first, their relationship felt like a dream, but over time, things began to shift. Ethan lost his job shortly after moving in with Sara, and while he claimed to be searching for work, Sara noticed he spent more time gaming than updating his resume. She convinced herself that things would get better, but instead, they got worse. Ethan's immaturity wasn't just limited to his career. He would roll his eyes whenever Sara talked about her accomplishments, often dismissing her as too ambitious. While Sara worked late nights building her freelance business, Ethan made excuses for why he couldn't contribute financially. Even more troubling was his attachment to his family, particularly his sister, Rachel, 29. Rachel, who struggled to hold down a job herself, often leaned on Ethan and Sara for support. Recently, she'd announced her engagement and, without asking, decided that Sara's home would be the perfect venue for her wedding. Sara, being kind-hearted and eager to make a good impression, initially agreed until Rachel started making demands. Rachel expected Sara to remove all her furniture and pets to accommodate her guests, all while ignoring Sara's messages and calls. When Sara confronted Ethan, he shrugged and said, "It's her big day. Don't ruin it." That was the moment Sara realized she was entirely alone in this relationship. Now, just 10 days before Rachel's wedding, Sara is quietly planning her escape. What would you do in Sara's position? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Sara sat alone at the edge of her bed, her phone screen glowing in the dim light of her bedroom. It was almost midnight, but sleep was the last thing on her mind. The weight of her decisions pressed heavily on her chest. She scrolled through her messages, dozens of unanswered texts to Rachel, asking for clarification about the wedding plans. The most recent one had been marked as seen, but as always, there was no response. Her fingers tightened around the phone as anger bubbled beneath the surface. For months, Sara had been juggling the chaos Ethan and his family had brought into her life. Rachel's entitlement wasn't new, but this wedding was the breaking point. When Rachel first asked to use Sara's home for her ceremony, Sara hesitated. She'd never been particularly close to Rachel, but she wanted to show goodwill. Maybe this was her chance to form a better relationship with Ethan's family. But her willingness to help had quickly turned into a nightmare. Rachel's demands escalated with each passing day, from moving out her furniture to boarding her beloved dog Luna, just so Rachel's guests wouldn't be inconvenienced. Ethan, predictably, took his sister's side. He'd brush off Sara's concerns with dismissive comments like, "You're overthinking this," or "Rachel doesn't mean any harm." But the truth was, Sara had felt invisible for a long time. Ethan wasn't just unsupportive, he actively undermined her. It wasn't just Rachel either. Ethan's mother, Linda, 60, often called Sara with unsolicited advice about how to keep a man happy. According to Linda, Sara was too independent for her own good. "You're too busy with work, honey," Linda would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "A man needs to feel like he's the provider." The irony wasn't lost on Sara. Ethan hadn't held down a steady job in 2 years. The final straw came a week ago when Sara overheard Ethan on the phone with his best friend. He laughed as he described her frustration with Rachel's wedding plans. "She's so uptight about everything," he'd said. "She just doesn't get how important family is." Those words cut deeper than Sara cared to admit. She'd sacrificed so much for Ethan, her time, her energy, her emotional well-being. And yet, he couldn't even see her as a partner. As she stared at her reflection in the dark window, Sara's mind raced. She had always been the type to put others first, to bend over backward to accommodate those she cared about. But this time was different. This time, she felt the growing urge to put herself first. She couldn't keep pouring into a relationship that gave her nothing in return. Sara's plan to leave wasn't impulsive. It had been building for months. She'd already spoken to her landlord, who agreed to terminate her lease early. Her best friend, Emily, had offered to help her move and even found a temporary home for Luna until Sara could settle into a new place. Still, guilt gnawed at her. The thought of leaving without telling Ethan felt wrong, even though she knew he and his family would likely lash out if they found out ahead of time. But Sara couldn't ignore the overwhelming fear of staying. The thought of waking up every day in a house where she was disrespected, belittled, and taken for granted was unbearable. She had spent years trying to make this relationship work, hoping Ethan would change, that he'd see her value. But now, as she packed her belongings in secret, she realized that she deserved better. The situation with Rachel's wedding only amplified her doubts. Sara had tried to be reasonable, to set boundaries, but Rachel and Ethan refused to respect them. Every attempt to communicate was met with silence or passive-aggressive comments. Sara could only imagine the chaos that would unfold if she told them she was leaving. Rachel would accuse her of sabotaging the wedding, and Linda would call her selfish. Ethan, as always, would play the victim, painting Sara as the villain who abandoned him when he needed her most. The truth was, Sara wasn't sure how much more she could take. The emotional toll of the relationship had left her drained. She felt like a shadow of the person she once was, a confident, ambitious woman who took pride in her work and her achievements. Now she barely recognized herself. But even as she planned her escape, doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Was she overreacting? Was it selfish to leave without giving Ethan a chance to change? She wanted to believe that people could grow, that love could conquer even the deepest flaws. But how many chances had she already given him? How many times had she justified his behavior, telling herself he was just going through a rough patch? Sara turned to Reddit because she needed an outside perspective. She needed someone to tell her she wasn't crazy for wanting to leave. She poured her heart into her post, describing every detail of her relationship. The neglect, the dismissiveness, the constant feeling of being used. She ended with a question that had been haunting her for weeks. Am I the a-hole for planning to leave without telling him? Am I wrong for wanting to protect my own peace? Her fingers hovered over the post button for a moment before she pressed it. She felt a surge of vulnerability, knowing her story was now out in the world for strangers to dissect. But she also felt a sliver of hope. Maybe someone out there had been through something similar. Maybe someone could help her see things more clearly. As Sara lay down that night, her phone buzzed with notifications. Comments and messages poured in, each one a lifeline. She read them with a mix of relief and sadness, tears streaming down her face as strangers validated her feelings. They told her she wasn't crazy, that she deserved better, that it was okay to choose herself. For the first time in months, Sara felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't just running away, she was taking a step toward freedom. But even with the support of the Reddit community, Sara knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She still had to navigate the logistics of leaving, the confrontation with Ethan, and the inevitable backlash from his family. She still had to face the fear of starting over. But now, with the encouragement of people who believed in her, she felt a renewed sense of strength. Sara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living like this. It was time to take control of her life. It was time to put herself first. What do you think? Is Sara justified in her decision to leave without telling Ethan? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between staying and leaving? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your advice could make all the difference for someone like Sara. The Reddit community wasted no time jumping in to support Sara, with her story striking a chord with thousands of people. Within hours, her post was flooded with comments offering sympathy, advice, and validation. The overwhelming consensus? Sara needed to leave Ethan and his toxic family, and she needed to do it without looking back. Many commenters empathized with Sara's struggles, praising her courage for even considering a way out. They reminded her that prioritizing her own happiness and well-being wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Others shared their personal experiences, revealing that they had been in similar situations and wished they had left sooner. One of the most upvoted comments came from user Strong and Thriving. Sara, you are a strong and successful woman who has achieved so much despite being surrounded by people who constantly drag you down. Ethan and his family don't deserve a single ounce of your energy. Pack your things, walk away, and don't let them guilt you into staying. You're not responsible for their happiness. Focus on your own. Another commenter, @boundaries are key, emphasized the importance of setting firm boundaries. Don't let his family continue to take advantage of you. They've shown over and over again that they don't respect you, your home, or your kindness. You've gone above and beyond for people who have done nothing but take from you. Please don't feel guilty for putting yourself first. You deserve to be happy, and they'll just have to deal with the consequences of their actions. A third commenter, @escape and heal, offered practical advice for Sara's escape plan. Sara, your instincts are spot on. Leave quietly and don't look back. Make sure you've covered all your bases, change your locks, block their numbers, and update your address so they can't find you. If you can, document everything leading up to your departure in case they try to pull something later. You've already taken the first step by reaching out for support. Now, take the next step and reclaim your life. You've got this. Beyond advice, the comments were filled with an outpouring of encouragement. Users cheered Sara on, telling her how inspiring her story was and reminding her of her worth. Some even offered to listen if she needed someone to talk to. But not every comment was purely supportive. There were some hard truths, too. A few users pointed out that Sara had ignored red flags in the early stages of her relationship with Ethan and had allowed his family to push her boundaries repeatedly. While these comments may have stung, they also served as a reminder that it was time for Sara to break the cycle and learn from the past. The community's collective message was clear. Sara deserved better. They urged her to focus on her bright future and let go of the toxic ties that had held her back for so long. With the strength of the Reddit community behind her, Sara couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't alone in her struggle. What about you? Do you think Sara should stick to her plan and leave quietly, or should she give Ethan one final chance to make things right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The past week had been a whirlwind of emotions for Sara. With her plans slowly taking shape, she found herself teetering between relief and anxiety. Every moment spent in the same house as Ethan felt like walking on eggshells, but she knew she couldn't tip him off about her plans. The last thing she wanted was to face an emotional confrontation, or worse, an explosive reaction from Ethan or his family. She had taken the first major step by speaking to her landlord. After explaining her situation, without too many details, she managed to negotiate an early termination of her lease. The landlord had been understanding, even agreeing to inspect the property as soon as she was ready to move out. That conversation gave Sara a small glimmer of hope, one less obstacle to worry about. Next, she focused on finding a new place to live. Through a recommendation from a close friend, she secured a cozy studio apartment in a neighboring city. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. The best part? It allowed pets, which meant Luna, her golden retriever, would have a safe and welcoming home. Sara had already sent Luna to stay with Emily for the time being. Knowing her dog was safe eased one small piece of the burden on her shoulders. Packing her belongings had been another hurdle. Sara had to time everything carefully, sneaking items into boxes late at night when Ethan was absorbed in his video games. She enlisted the help of Emily and another trusted friend to help move her things. Every time Sara opened a drawer or folded a piece of clothing, she felt the weight of the life she was leaving behind. There were moments when she questioned her decision. Was she overreacting? Should she try harder to fix things with Ethan? But deep down, she knew the truth. She had done everything she could. Still, her resolve wavered when she thought about the aftermath. Ethan's family wasn't just controlling, they were volatile. Linda, his mother, had a history of flying off the handle whenever things didn't go her way. Rachel, his sister, was just as unpredictable. Sara could already picture the angry texts and calls she would receive once they realized she was gone. The thought made her stomach churn. As she prepared to leave, Sara couldn't help but wonder, should I tell Ethan before I go? Should I leave him a note or try to explain? Part of her felt like disappearing without a word would be cruel, but another part of her feared what might happen if she stayed to explain. Ethan wasn't physically aggressive, but his words had a way of cutting deep. He knew how to manipulate her emotions, twisting every situation until she felt like the guilty one. And if his family got involved, Sara shuddered at the thought. She decided to turn to Reddit once again, hoping the community could provide some clarity. In her update, she shared the progress she had made, the canceled lease, the new apartment, and the careful steps she was taking to avoid suspicion. But she also laid bare her fears. I'm trying to stay calm, but I can't stop thinking about what happens after I leave. I know Ethan's family will come after me, probably with threats and accusations. Should I say something to him before I leave? Or should I just disappear like I planned? I don't want to deal with the fallout, but I also don't want to feel like a coward. What would you do in my shoes? The response was immediate. Comments flooded in, echoing the support and advice Sara had received earlier. Most people urged her to stick to her plan and leave quietly. They warned her about the dangers of engaging with Ethan or his family, especially if she knew they were likely to lash out. One user wrote, "Sara, you've already done the hard part. You've made the decision to leave. Don't let guilt pull you back into their web. You don't owe Ethan an explanation, especially when you know it won't change anything. Protect your peace and go." Another commenter said, "Leaving without a word isn't cruel, it's self-preservation. These people have taken advantage of you for years, and they'll do it again if you give them the chance. Block their numbers, change your locks, and don't look back." Some users suggested practical steps to ensure her safety, like documenting her departure and keeping a record of any interactions she had with Ethan or his family. One comment stood out for its blunt yet empathetic tone. "Sara, disappearing doesn't make you a coward, it makes you smart. You've seen how they operate. If you try to explain yourself, they'll just use it as ammo to guilt and manipulate you. Get out, stay out, and don't let them drag you back." Despite the overwhelming support, a few comments reminded Sara to prepare for the emotional aftermath. Leaving wouldn't be easy, even if it was the right choice. She would likely feel guilt, doubt, and sadness as she adjusted to her new life. But those emotions, they said, were temporary. Freedom and happiness were worth the short-term pain. Sara read each comment carefully, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and hope. The idea of disappearing without a word still felt harsh, but she couldn't ignore the logic behind it. Ethan and his family had shown her time and time again that they didn't respect her boundaries or her feelings. Why should she give them the opportunity to hurt her one last time? As she closed her laptop, Sara felt a small spark of determination. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew this. She was done sacrificing herself for people who didn't value her. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Sara felt like she was walking toward something better. What do you think? Should Sara say something to Ethan before she leaves, or should she stick to her plan and disappear? Let us know in the comments below. Your advice could make all the difference. As Sara's story gained more attention, the Reddit community rallied behind her once again, offering even more advice and encouragement. Her latest update had stirred a mix of emotions among readers. Many empathized with her struggle to balance her desire for closure with the need to protect herself. The consensus remained clear. Sara needed to put herself first, even if that meant leaving without a word. From a narrator's perspective, it's hard not to feel for Sara. She spent years sacrificing her happiness and well-being for people who clearly don't value her. Ethan and his family have taken advantage of her kindness, dismissed her accomplishments, and manipulated her into thinking she owed them something. At this point, Sara has done more than enough to justify her departure. If cutting ties completely is what she needs to heal, then that's exactly what she should do. The community echoed this sentiment. One user, @FreedomFirst, offered a straightforward but powerful perspective. "Sara, you don't owe Ethan or his family anything. You've already given them more than they deserve. Just leave, block their numbers, and don't look back. They'll try to guilt you, but remember, They're not your responsibility. You deserve to live a life free from their toxicity. Another user, Protect Your Peace, emphasized the importance of covering her bases. Sara, please keep any evidence of your departure. Screenshots of texts, a written inventory of what you're leaving behind, and even photos of the house before you go. It might sound excessive, but if they're as manipulative as you say, they could try to twist the narrative. Protect yourself, and don't give them any room to accuse you of wrongdoing. These comments struck a chord with Sara. She knew that leaving quietly was the safest option, but the advice to document everything resonated deeply. The idea of being falsely accused by Ethan or his family wasn't far-fetched, and having proof of her actions gave her a sense of security. As Sara prepared to take the next step, she found strength in the unwavering support of strangers. Their words reminded her that she wasn't alone in this journey, and that prioritizing her happiness wasn't selfish. It was necessary. What's your take? Do you agree with the advice to cut off all contact and document everything? Let us know in the comments below. Your input could help Sara, and others like her, find the courage to move forward. The morning Sara left started just like any other day, at least for Ethan. He didn't suspect a thing. As usual, he woke up late, lingered over his coffee, and mumbled something about heading out to run errands. Sara watched him from the corner of her eye, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to keep her face neutral, but inside, a storm of emotions brewed. Fear, anticipation, and most of all, hope. As the door clicked shut behind him, Sara sprang into action. The movers Emily had arranged were already waiting outside, ready to help her pack up the last of her belongings. She had spent the past week quietly boxing up items, making sure to do it in small increments so Ethan wouldn't notice. Now it was time to finish the job. Her hands trembled as she carried the first box to the truck. She wasn't just packing up her things, she was packing up years of hurt, disappointment, and frustration. Every piece of furniture, every picture frame, every item she carried out of that house felt like a small victory. By the time the movers finished loading the truck, the house was eerily empty, save for Ethan's belongings, which Sara had carefully packed into black trash bags. The final step was dropping Ethan's things off at his mother's house. Sara pulled into Linda's driveway, her stomach churning as she stepped out of the car. Linda was outside watering her plants, and when she saw Sara, her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "Sara, what's going on?" Linda asked, walking toward her. Sara didn't answer. She opened the trunk, grabbed the first bag, and set it down on the porch. Linda's questions grew louder and more insistent, but Sara didn't stop. Bag after bag, she unloaded everything: Ethan's clothes, his gaming equipment, his paperwork. "Sara, what are you doing? Talk to me," Linda demanded. But Sara stayed silent. She avoided eye contact, keeping her focus on the task at hand. When the last bag was in place, she turned to leave. "Sara," Linda called out, her voice rising. "You owe me an explanation." Sara hesitated for a split second, but then climbed back into her car and drove away without a word. Her heart raced as she pulled onto the main road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She didn't look back. When Ethan returned home that evening, he was greeted by an empty house and a locked door. He tried his key, but it didn't work. Sara had changed the locks. Confused, he called her. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. He called again, and again, and again. Sara stared at her phone as it buzzed repeatedly, her name lighting up the screen. For a moment, she considered answering, but then she remembered the advice she'd received. Don't engage. Just walk away. She silenced the phone and let it ring. It didn't take long for Ethan to figure out what had happened. A mutual friend told him Sara had moved out. That's when the angry texts started. "How could you do this to me?" one message read. "You're so selfish," said another. Sara didn't respond. She blocked his number and deleted him from all her social media accounts. But Ethan's family wasn't as easy to ignore. Rachel, predictably, was furious. She accused Sara of sabotaging her wedding, spreading lies among friends and family that Sara had deliberately ruined everything out of spite. It didn't matter that Sara had tried for months to get Rachel to communicate, or that she had only decided to leave after being ignored and disrespected repeatedly. To Rachel, Sara was the villain in her story. But not everyone bought into Rachel's narrative. Ethan's father, Mark, had always been more level-headed than the rest of the family, and when he heard what was happening, he stepped in. "Let me get this straight," Mark said during a heated family call, according to a mutual friend who later relayed the story to Sara. "You're mad at Sara for leaving? Maybe you should be mad at yourselves. Rachel, you've been freeloading off everyone for years and expect people to cater to your every whim. Ethan, you've been sitting on your ass playing video games while Sara worked herself to the bone. She doesn't owe either of you anything. You should be ashamed of how you treated her." The room reportedly went silent after that. Rachel tried to argue, but Mark shut her down. "This family has been a mess for years, and it's no wonder Sara wanted out," he said. "Frankly, I don't blame her." For Sara, hearing about Mark's comments brought an unexpected sense of validation. She hadn't expected anyone in Ethan's family to defend her, but knowing that at least one person understood her perspective felt like a small victory. In the days that followed, Sara slowly began to adjust to her new life. Her studio apartment was small but cozy, and Luna had already made herself at home, curling up on the couch as if she'd lived there forever. For the first time in years, Sara felt a sense of peace. She still had moments of doubt, wondering if she should have handled things differently or given Ethan one last chance. But those thoughts were fleeting. Every time she felt a pang of guilt, she reminded herself of the years she'd spent putting Ethan and his family first, only to be met with dismissal and disrespect. As she unpacked the last of her boxes, Sara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had escaped the toxic relationship that had drained her for so long, and while the road ahead wasn't entirely clear, she felt ready to face whatever came next. What's your takeaway from Sara's journey? Do you think she handled the situation the right way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're ever in a similar situation, remember, putting yourself first isn't selfish, it's necessary. Sara's story is one that resonates deeply with so many people. It's a powerful reminder of the emotional toll that toxic relationships can take and the courage it takes to walk away. Sara spent years pouring her energy into people who never reciprocated her kindness, who dismissed her efforts, and who ultimately made her feel invisible. But in the end, she chose herself, and that decision changed everything. The biggest lesson from Sara's journey is that self-worth isn't tied to how much you endure for others. Far too often, we're made to believe that love means sacrifice, but Sara's experience shows us that love without respect, appreciation, and partnership is not love at all. It's a drain, a one-sided arrangement that leaves you emotionally depleted. Sara's courage to leave proves a universal truth. Sometimes, the hardest decisions lead to the greatest peace. It's not easy to walk away, especially when guilt and fear of the unknown weigh heavily on your heart. But staying in a toxic environment, hoping things will change, often does more harm than good. In the end, Sara realized that she couldn't fix Ethan or his family. She could only protect herself by setting boundaries and cutting ties. Another key takeaway from Sara's story is the importance of listening to your instincts. For months, she ignored the red flags, hoping things would improve. But once she acknowledged the reality of her situation, she took control of her life. Her decision to leave wasn't impulsive. It was thoughtful, deliberate, and necessary. And by documenting everything and planning her departure carefully, Sara ensured her safety and peace of mind. This story also reminds us of the power of community. Sara turned to Reddit not just for advice, but for validation, and the support she received gave her the strength to take the leap. It's a testament to how sharing our stories can create connections and inspire others to take bold steps in their own lives. For anyone watching this, Sara's story might feel uncomfortably familiar. Maybe you've stayed in a relationship or situation longer than you should have. Maybe you've struggled with setting boundaries or felt guilty for putting yourself first. If that's the case, let Sara's journey be a sign. It's okay to choose you. It's okay to walk away from people who don't value you, and it's okay to demand more from the people in your life. If you've ever been in a similar situation, we'd love to hear your story. Have you had to leave a toxic relationship or set boundaries with people who didn't respect you? How did you navigate that experience? Share your thoughts and advice in the comments below. Your words could help someone else find the strength to make a change. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Also, subscribe to AGS Stories for more real-life tales that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the power of resilience. Click on one of the videos on your screen now to keep the stories going. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.